Tonight, the head of MI5 warns about the threat from foreign states and reveals his officers disrupted a case linked to Beijing just in the last week. So Ken McCallum says that he will never back off from confronting threats from China. He says it's frustrating when prosecutions fall through. It comes as the CPS comes under renewed scrutiny for its decision not to pursue a case against two men accused of spying for Beijing. Parliament's Intelligence Committee launches an inquiry. Also tonight, drug deliveries by drone. A special report on the prison inmates receiving contraband drops. The Chancellor tells Sky News that the UK is the envy of the world, despite one of the world's largest companies abandoning plans to build a new plant in Hull. And as Donald Trump rages against a less than flattering magazine front page, we'll look back at times our glamorous political class were a bit less than photogenic. All that and more with the always photogenic Nick Ferrari and Hannah Bardell, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday. I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening to you all. I'm going to start tonight with the boss of MI5, who has warned of a new era of global security threats facing the country. In an annual speech at the Security Services headquarters, Sir Ken McCallum said the agency is contending with more volume and more variety of threat from terrorists and state actors than he has ever seen. The MI5 chief also cautioned that the UK must defend itself resolutely against any security threats from China and said it was frustrating when prosecutions fall through as the row of the collapsed trial against two British men accused of spying for Beijing continues. Our first report tonight is from our defence and security editor, Deborah Haynes.
Stepping out of the shadows to warn about threats amid a very public outcry over the collapse of a China spy trial.
The UK-China relationship is, by its nature, complex, but MI5's role is not. We detect and deal robustly with activity threatening UK national security. Our track record is strong. We've intervened operationally again just in the last week, and we will keep doing so. I am MI5 born and bred. I will never back off from confronting threats to the UK wherever they come from.
Yet backing off is exactly what prosecutors did when they dropped the case against two British men accused of spying for China. Former parliamentary researcher Christopher Cash and teacher Christopher Barry deny wrongdoing. The failure to prosecute clearly painful.
Yes, we are frustrated when those things don't happen. Like, this is not unique. There are sometimes reasons why prosecutions don't work. But the key thing for us to do is to disrupt threats, and that's what we've done.
In an annual speech, Sir Ken McCallum warned that threats from China, as well as Russia and Iran, are escalating.
In the last year, we've seen a 35% increase in the number of individuals we're investigating for involvement in state threat activity. That means espionage, including against our parliament, our universities, our critical infrastructure. But now, states are also consistently descending into ugly methods MI5 is more used to seeing in our terrorism casework.
It's not just hostile states trying to inflict harm. The MI5 boss offered his sympathies to those impacted by the Manchester synagogue terrorist attack.
In 2025, MI5 is contending with more volume and more variety of threat from terrorists and state actors than I've ever seen.
China denied allegations of spying.
We have noted the relevant situation. China's position is very clear. We firmly oppose hyping up so-called espionage activities to smear and vilify China. Such accusations are pure slander. We urge the relevant British individuals to stop making unfounded hype and cease political manipulation.
It can't have been comfortable delivering a speech like this in the middle of the spy trial storm, with opposition MPs accusing the government of interfering in the case to protect trading ties with Beijing. is perhaps why the head of MI5 chose his words carefully. He said Chinese state actors pose a threat to national security every day. But when it comes to wider foreign policy on Beijing, well, that's a matter for ministers. A delicate balancing act as MI5 navigates what it describes as a new era of threat. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Well, this comes, of course, as the row continues over the collapse of that alleged China spying case, with multiple parliamentary inquiries now underway. Witness statements released by the government last night showed that the Deputy National Security Advisor had said that China was highly capable of carrying out espionage against the UK. But the release has done very little to end those discussions about the case, as Amanda Acas reports.
If the government thought publishing the witness statements blamed for the collapse of the Chinese spying trial would calm the blazing political row in Westminster, they were wrong.
Here we have two individuals seeking to extract information from us. And the government's response is not, as mine was, do everything you can to make sure the prosecution works, but no, process. Well, who the hell's side are you on? This isn't about the bureaucracy, this is about leadership.
Ex-Security Minister Tom Tugendhat is one of the MPs allegedly targeted by Chinese intelligence. Former parliamentary researcher Christopher Cash and teacher Christopher Berry deny spying for China. The charges against them were dropped in September, a decision the Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Parkinson, blamed on the government for failing to provide evidence China posed a threat to national security at the time of the alleged offences between 2021 and 23. Ministers claim statements submitted as evidence by Matthew Collins, the Deputy National Security Advisor, or DNSA, show that's not the case.
It's clear from this evidence, which all can now see, that the DNSA took significant strides to articulate the threat from China in support of the prosecution. The decision to proceed, as the Prime Minister made clear yesterday, was taken purely by the CPS.
In his first statement, submitted under the Tories in 2023, Collins wrote that the Chinese intelligence services are highly capable and conduct large-scale espionage operations against the UK, which harm the interest and security of the UK. In the second, written this February under Labour, he described China as the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. And in the third statement this August, he talked about Chinese espionage threatening the UK's economic prosperity and resilience and the integrity of our democratic institutions. He also pointed out that the government is committed to pursuing a positive relationship with China. We will cooperate where we can, compete where we need to, and challenge where we must.
That line is a quote from the Labour manifesto, prompting some Tory MPs to question the Prime Minister's insistence that there's been no political interference in the case, and the argument that the only evidence which matters is the previous government's policy not to designate China an enemy at the time of the alleged offences. The PM's official spokesperson told us earlier that line was only included to provide context and to demonstrate that the UK's position on China hasn't really changed much between governments. Some MPs are now training their fire on the Director of Public Prosecutions, asking why he didn't want to risk a jury trial despite telling MPs that the evidence was 95% of the way there.
Former Conservative Attorney General Dominic Grieve believes the statements do support the government's position.
Conservatives alleging that the current government has essentially interfered to bring this prosecution to a close. I think that is extraordinarily unlikely. The DPP may well wish to provide an explanation as to why, in those circumstances, he felt that the prosecution couldn't proceed.
Now, 2 parliamentary security committees have launched their own investigations into what happened, demanding answers from both the government and the Director of Public Prosecutions. After all the political sound and fury, the prosecutors are back in the blame game. Amanda Acas, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, that story, of course, will feature in tomorrow's papers, and we're going to have an extended press preview from 10:30 tonight with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us this evening will be the political journalist and broadcaster Theo Usherwood and Politic Joe's political correspondent Eva Evans. That's from 10:30 tonight here on Sky News. Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening. They are the broadcaster Nick Ferrari and the former SNP MP Hannah Bardell. Very good evening to you both. Hannah, let's start with you if we can, because this story is incredibly complex. I mean, I've been talking about it for more than a week now. I'm not entirely sure I understand all of it. And there's a real blame game coming on involving the DPP, the CPS, the Conservative Party, the Labour government. What's your sense of where we are on this Thursday evening?
I think, for me, there are kind of three key areas. One is that we're in the situation where, you know, a foreign adversary has infiltrated the very heart of government, and that is something that we should all be concerned about in terms of, you know, what it means for our democratic institutions. There's questions around the fact that the prosecution couldn't be taken and why that is, and that seems to be because partly the UK had failed to designate China, which says a lot about them putting perhaps trade before security and our own domestic interests. And then there is just the general question or statement that it says to our adversaries and any enemies of game on. Like, it's clearly not a difficult thing to do, and if you do it, you're not going to be punished. And all of those things, I think, I understand it's complex and it's hard to get people interested in it, but I think they are things that we should be concerned about.
Nick, the other interesting thing that's come out in the last 24 hours is obviously this kind of testimony, and we've also heard from the Deputy National Security Advisor, who's a civil servant, and yet seems to be including parts of Labour's manifesto. That does seem a little odd, doesn't it?
Well, you say you've struggled to fully understand it. I'm happy to admit I don't understand it. I realise that it's national security, but, hey, shock horror, 2 people have allegedly been caught spying for China. You think we're not spying on them? Of course we are. And I have to share with you, and your colleague just said there's a lot of storm and angst. Well, there is in Westminster, but out there, I don't know how much people care. Wow, countries are spying on each other. China spies on the UK. Now, I get national security. I get your point. I do, I absolutely. But honestly, I know that my listeners are more worried about the rise in unemployment, the drop in cost of living, concerns over the budget.
But are they until the point where, you know, and we've seen that, I'm not saying that's what China's done, but we've seen a lot of hacking recently, a lot of companies in a lot of trouble, Jaguar Land Rover, M&S. The point about spying and the point about accessing and infiltrating us is that they've got the ability. So it might not seem like a big issue until it is an issue.
Well, if my listeners' calls are being heard in Beijing, and if their Chinese cars are suddenly brought to a halt, and if we can't get any goods out of China, yes, then that is of huge concern. But at the moment, it's a story that, quite rightly, look, I cover it on LBC, you cover it on Sky News. We have to cover it because this morning it was on, I think, 8 of the 10 front pages. So it is news. But we have to be aware that some of the detail, to use your colleague John Craig's brilliant expression, this might be one for the aficionados. That is the reality here, I think. It
is, and definitely, you know, the thing about this story is it's got a long way to run because...
Absolutely.
And
we must do it. I'm not saying we don't do it.
Because we don't really understand, even today, what's gone on. But it also, I suppose, in a wider context, Hannah, gets into this... What is our relationship with China going to be like? What should it be? Yeah. We recognise, you know, you just have to listen to the security services, they are a threat, but they're also the second largest economy in the world.
Yeah. And that will be the biggest challenge. And it does feel like there is a sense that Labour are trying to face both ways, or the Prime Minister is trying to face both ways on this. He wants to maintain trading relationships. You have to recognise that it is the second biggest economy. But on the other hand, we also have to protect our businesses, our people.
I think both parties are guilty of that as well, aren't you? Remember how Mr Cameron cozied up. Do you not think that's fair?
Totally. And also, we'll remember, and remember as well, the infrastructure issues that we had around phone masts and Huawei. We wanted to sell off our critical infrastructure in the UK, and the way that people receive their, you know, phone signals to a country that is spying on us and that we have serious security concerns.
Would say it's not just on things like, you know, economic trade. It's also on the fact that, you know, big issue for this government is climate change. You know, China is going to be a big part of that narrative. Again, like given where the United States is, China's probably closer to the UK's position on climate change than the United States is.
And there's a huge number of moving parts in it, and I think that is what makes it more complex. But I think that makes a really solid point. How do you make it real for people? How do you help them understand why they should care about this issue and what it means for them on a practical level? And when you've got big companies being hacked, you know, planes or trains being ground to a halt, if a country has the ability to do that to us, then we should be concerned about it.
One thing the listeners and hopefully the viewers can tune into really quickly is that China wants to have the biggest embassy on the planet here in London, and there are so many security. Now, that is something your viewers can say, well, hang on a second, if we've got this sort of issues, do we want an embassy like that? Or they say, yeah, to your point, Hannah, we've got to trade with them, come on.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that decision has been delayed yet
Indeed.
again until December. And on that point, actually, I was speaking to Luke de Pulford, who is from the, I think it's the chair of the Interparliamentary Committee, the executive director of that alliance on China. And we got into lots of these issues, but not least of all about trying to work out what his sense is of what's gone on here. Just have a watch. Look, there's been a real blame game over the last week or so between the governments, the Conservative Party, the CPS, the DPP. What's your sense of what's gone on here? What's collapsed this trial?
Well, I don't think anybody is blameless, honestly, and there are lots of questions still to answer. It seems to me that what the Prime Minister said in the House of Commons really stretches credulity, because he said the Labour Party have nothing to do with any of this. Current Labour Party policy has nothing to do with this. This is all about what the government's policy was at the time of the alleged offences. If that's true, then I do not know why two of the witness statements, the only two produced under the current government, contain cut and paste language from the Labour Party manifesto on China. That doesn't make sense to me.
That was from a civil servant. Are you suggesting there might be, or there could have been, some political interference? But something the government seems to be suggesting is not the case.
Well, I wouldn't even describe it as political interference, because previously, when the Deputy National Security Advisor had been providing evidence in Official Secrets Act cases, you would expect him to talk to his boss, the National Security Advisor. You'd expect him to brief others. He was giving the government's view. So the idea that he acted totally unilaterally, what the Prime Minister said, he acted completely on his own, I don't understand that.
OK. I mean, his boss, of course, is Jonathan Powell, in case anyone is wondering at home. But on the questions also here, too, for the CPS, I mean, the reason you take these things to trial, that you get so far down the system, is you think that you're going to win in court, or you've got a chance, at least, of winning in court. Why not still proceed when there is lots of other evidence in the public domain about the possible threat from China?
That, again, is a very good question, and one that I think that the CPS has to answer. Reading those statements, even with the inclusion of these slightly odd soft paragraphs on current Labour Party policy on China, even with that, it's a pretty clear assessment of the threat from China, and you would think that that would get to the threshold needed. Let me give a bit of context. In the last major case, which was the case of the Bulgarian spy ring, the Rusev case, the Defence Counsel tried to argue that Russia wasn't an enemy, because enemy means country with which we're at war. And the judge said, no way. Enemy just means anyone presenting an ongoing national security threat. You are right. There was plenty of evidence in the public domain indicating that in that period where the alleged offences were committed, there was plenty of evidence to suggest China is an ongoing national security threat. So I don't understand why the CPS didn't simply proceed with the case on the basis of what they had.
You are self-described as a China hawk. I think that's fair to say. And so you're kind of quite critical of China. What's your assessment, and we heard a bit of this from MI5 today, of the threat that they pose? And when we talk about that threat, what do we actually mean?
Well, if you don't want to take the word of a China hawk around the threat from China, you can simply listen to the unprecedented statement that the chief of MI5 gave with the chief of the FBI a couple of years ago, where they issued this joint statement, really unusual thing, saying our principal security threat is from China. And they laid out a number of the reasons for that, not just these mass cyber operations that are happening all the time, but the interference and influence operations that occur through the United Front. This is basically the overseas influence arm of the Chinese Communist Party. And it doesn't stop there, because there is a deliberate strategy to inculcate dependency of other democracies upon China so that they have increased leverage, and so that countries like the UK are not in a position where they can speak out for their values purely because they know that there's too much economic skin in the game.
I mean, it's it now, of course, China, and they've repeatedly denied lots of this. We should note that. But my point is, what would you say to those? And by the way, when I say those, I mean people in this government, in a previous government, in Westminster, who say, yes, of course, China may well pose a threat, but it's also the second largest economy in the world. It is an economy and a country that we need to cooperate with. And essentially, everyone also does spy on everyone else.
A couple of things to say to that. I think the first thing is that China is a huge economy, there's no doubting that, but the UK operates a £40 billion trade deficit with China. China doesn't really do foreign direct investment anymore. It dropped off a cliff in 2017. I don't accept the argument that there is some kind of dichotomy between our national security and being able to be an outwardly facing trading nation. I don't think that's true. I also don't think it's correct to compare the UK's, let's say, espionage operations with what China is doing through the United Front and the sheer scale of its infrastructure hacking operations. The United States only last year confirmed 2 major infrastructure hacks from China that had the ability to shut down critical infrastructure. We're not doing that to China.
OK, and just very finally, obviously, the decision on the new Chinese embassy has been delayed yet again until December. What's your concerns about that embassy? Because, I mean, it's 2025. There's a lot of sophisticated ways, potentially, to spy on people or to threaten them. Yeah. I mean, a building, no matter where it's placed, doesn't seem like it should be that big a deal, is it?
I think the first thing to say is that the existing Chinese embassy probably does need to move. I don't think it's an appropriate location. But what they're proposing is the largest embassy in Europe, in London. We have to think about what that means for the Chinese Communist Party in the midst of a period of time where people are waking up to the real face of the Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping. Can we imagine that during the height of the Cold War, we would have allowed the Soviet Union to build the biggest embassy in Europe, in London?
At that stage, though? The Cold War?
Well, I think you can make those comparisons. And in fact, although these are very different situations, our economic entwinement with China is much greater than it was between the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union, and it arguably makes it even harder for us to defend our values and national security.
There we go. OK, you're watching The Politics Hub here on Sky News. Up next, drug deliveries via drone. We're bringing you a special Sky News investigation into the inmates receiving contraband drops, literally from drones, over prisons. Quite extraordinary stuff. That's up next.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back to The Politics Hub. Now, I want to talk about the state of our prisons for a bit, and my word, what a state they're in. Levels of self-harm, violence and drug abuse are shockingly high. At the weekend, Ian Watkins was killed inside Wakefield Prison, apparently one of our most secure. In other prisons, inmates themselves don't feel safe enough to leave their own cells. Morale among many staff is rock bottom. As we'll see in a second, drones are now increasingly being used with seeming impunity. And what makes it worse? Well, the buildings themselves. They're also crumbling after years of underinvestment into a state of disrepair. And increasingly, the inexperienced staff, and they are inexperienced because so many have already quit, are struggling. They're frankly overwhelmed. So who is to blame? Well, let's be honest, everyone. Successive governments have failed to build enough prison places, even as the population, and thus the prison population, has increased massively. And austerity has a lot to answer too. The Ministry of Justice was always seemingly the easiest budget to cut, and routinely was the number of prison staff per prisoner. Don't forget this, it's still well below what it was 15 years ago. Funding is also well below what it was 15 years ago. It is simply incredible, let's not forget this, in several points in the last few years, that the entire system was on the verge of collapse. Of course, it resulted in the thousands of convicted criminals being let out early. Now, there will be lots of arguments about how many places we should have, about whether prison really works at all, whether we should seriously consider other forms of punishment. But as we stand today, the entire system is a mess. In fact, actually, it's worse than that. It feels like the most lawless parts of our country are actually to be found inside our prison walls. Really is quite extraordinary, as is this special report from our correspondent Molly Malone, who's been looking into the rise of drones and their use to deliver drugs and other banned items inside prisons. And this is her report.
It's the middle of the night and we're outside Wandsworth Prison in South London. For hours, the sky was still, almost silent. Until this. That's the sound of a drone making its descent into the prison. It's brazen, it's bold, and it's because of demand. Demand on the inside for what you're about to see. That was a drop of drugs which were delivered directly to an inmate's window. Watch it again, the drone hovers and then suddenly drops the package. And it wouldn't be the only one of the night.
You can probably still make out that sound. It's just gone 2:30 in the morning and all we've heard for the last 20 minutes or so is drones buzzing across the skyline, heading into Wandsworth Prison.
Look carefully at the bottom of the screen. You can make out the package dangling at the end. For a few minutes it hovered, taking time for precision. And then it dips down into the prison. Again, sources told me this was a delivery of drugs.
What we've just seen is pretty much the biggest problem facing prisons right now, drones that are able to freely fly over the walls of a jail that's housing serious criminals.
Come daylight, we showed our pictures to the Prison Governors Association.
This is big business, it's worth them doing, it's sophisticated. There is also a concern that some of the large drones that are mostly built for agriculture can actually lift payloads of sort of 80 kilos. I mean, that's a person size.
In a sign of how serious the authorities are taking it, we obtained an internal email sent around the prison service saying that the National Crime Agency has tasked police forces with treating the threat of drones as a national priority. It says under powers used previously only a handful of times around child sexual exploitation and small boats crossing the English Channel. Across a weekend in August, we filmed at this Category A prison in Worcestershire. As dusk turned to dark, inmates could be heard on the inside. While from the outside comes this. Another drone. Zoom in and you'll see another package at the end.
I mean, it's terrifying to see that above a high-security prison. This is a prison that has some serious terrorist offenders. It has organised crime bosses. It has people you really don't want getting their hands on illicit contraband.
In May, we reported on a prison officer that was allegedly stabbed by an inmate at this jail with a knife that sources suggested had come from the outside via a drone. Residents who live nearby have noticed what they say are routine deliveries. We're not showing their faces to protect their identities.
From 100 metres away, being able to sort of visually see a package being dropped into a category A prison, it's unnerving, really.
You've talked to the authorities about it. What are they saying?
To be honest with you, they're frustrated, you know, and quite frankly feel powerless because there's nothing they can do.
In a statement, the government told us they inherited a prison system in crisis, with drone incidents rising by over 770% between 2019 and 2023. They said, we're taking this risk extremely seriously, which is why we're investing £40 million in new security measures, including exterior netting and reinforced windows, and working with the police to tackle the serious organised criminals behind this threat. Prisons are ultimately about public safety, keeping danger and criminality contained. But at the moment, demand on the inside is driving deliveries from the outside, of drugs, weapons and even takeaways. The drops we saw were later intercepted by staff, but this is a trade that appears to be easy, accessible and only getting worse. Molly Malone, Sky News.
Well, we've also had a response from the Met Police to all of this. They say that the Met takes all reports of suspicious drone activity at or near prisons extremely seriously. These incidents can pose significant risks to prison staff, inmates and the wider public. We've also heard from West Mercia Police, who say we continue to respond robustly and immediately to all reported sightings and intelligence in relation to drones near His Majesty's Prison, Long Lartin. As a result of intercepting suspected vehicles, we've prevented drugs, weapons, mobile phones and other contraband from entering the prison, as well as seizing the drones attempting to convey these items in. Nick and Hannah are still with me. Nick, I mean, it's just insane. I think there's any other word for it.
It's breathtaking. It's appalling. But I want to take us, excuse me, in a slightly different direction and just think of the staff who are trying to work in these conditions. You will note that there's been I think it's almost 8% increase in violence on staff, violence against staff members. Well, if they're getting in drugs, possibly they're getting in knives, allegedly. Are they going to get in a gun? What is the level of violence that's been displayed towards the men and women who are, and I'm going to say this, who are brave enough to actually do the job, to keep behind bars?
Quitting.
Well, and no surprise, there's a recruitment crisis with this going on. You would have thought with netting and grills, why are the windows, is it me? Why are the windows open? Why aren't there bars? Why are they able to do it? But I appreciate there will be other drops from other drones. I don't think I've ever seen quite like it.
I'm sure we can, I mean, we see this in war, that you can intercept, or it's jam, drones.
Yeah.
Hannah?
I mean, it's a remarkable piece of journalism, is what I would say, and to see the head of the Inspectorate of Prisons having to have that footage played to him and his reaction to it just shows what a huge problem it is. And you know, that nexus of underfunding, under-resource, fear of officers, we're at a huge tipping point. And I think there was also a sort of quirk, and more than a quirk, a serious mistake by the UK government that it didn't include Scotland in this, because even though prisons and justice are devolved to Scotland, the issues around drones are a matter for civil aviation and obviously the Home Office, and Scotland got left out, which is a huge problem, because this is just as much a problem outside of England and in the other nations of the UK. But I have a friend who used to be a prison officer, and she told me she became a train driver instead, that the threats, and it's not just when they're actually in the prison. I mean, we've seen examples of cars of prison officers being firebombed. If they're in the situation that violence is emboldened, then we create an incredibly dangerous situation. But I think what was really interesting about your report was it talked about the broader picture. And I think a discussion about the broader picture is incredibly important. We are locking up more people than we ever have before. We are not rehabilitating people. And if people are not rehabilitated, it just becomes a vicious cycle, and it's society that loses out.
And Nick, just finally on that wider political point there, you know, I touched upon this austerity there, and you know, there's big arguments about public spending. There's a big argument at the moment about public spending, and there's questions about what the state should do in people's lives. That involves welfare and it involves health. But one of the things I think almost everyone agrees is that the state needs to lock people up when they've committed crimes, and yet we did go through a period, I think we all remember this, when, because of government, I think the Ministry of Justice did seem like it was quite an easy target, and actually the roosters are coming home to roost or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Chickens coming home to roost. The problem is, I don't think there are votes in prisons. This is the reality. So if you're sitting there and you're looking to cut budgets, you don't want to cut education, you certainly don't want to cut health, you probably don't want to cut defence. So I tell you what, Nobody really, and I put this in single word, nobody really cares about prisons, let's cut that. And it takes a report like we've just seen on Sky News to show the reality. And I come again to your point, these prison officers, I would not do, and they're not well paid anyway, I wouldn't contemplate doing the job for double what they get. We're very fortunate they're prepared to do it.
And frankly, they don't get the public appreciation
no, they don't.
Say, or police officers or people who serve in the army do, but they do equally as crucial job. OK, for the moment, we're going to pause on that because we're going to return to a news story that we have broken in the last hour or so, and that involves Israeli football fans supporting Maccabi Tel Aviv. And they are being told essentially not to attend the Europa League match against Aston Villa after police classified it as a high-risk event. We've had lots of reaction in the last hour. Our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, is in the newsroom for us. Rob, what have people been saying?
Well, this decision to ban Israeli fans from being at Aston Villa for the Europa League match in 3 weeks is really causing something of a diplomatic row. We're now hearing from the Israeli Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, and he's calling it a shameful decision. I call on the UK authorities to reverse this cowardly decision. It's a decision taken today at a meeting involving the police and the local council in Birmingham, and they've deemed this match high risk, believing that there are safety concerns if Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were allowed at Villa Park. They're talking about the fear of protest, pro-Palestinian protests, anti-Israeli protests, which means that there could be issues guaranteeing safety. Now, the campaign against anti-Semitism has said this is yet another alarming sign of how British authorities are failing to ensure that Jews can participate safely and equally in public life. The statement talks about the anti-Semitic hatred that's going on, making it unsafe for Israeli fans, and being very critical of the decision to exclude the victims, as they say. And the campaign against anti-Semitism statement continues. If British police cannot guarantee the safety of Jewish and Israeli fans at a football match, what does it say about the state of policing and public order in this country? Now, it's the advice of the police that this decision was taken on, very much the safety certificate being determined on how safe it would be if there were to be protests around Villa Park for this match. And West Midlands police say that they believe that banning Israeli fans will help mitigate risks to public safety. And Birmingham City Council, a Labour-led council, saying that it's a collective decision made to restrict the away fans. We're yet to hear from the government. Usually it is UEFA as European football's governing body that takes decisions to ban fans. It can be, for instances, at matches. And West Midlands Police in their statement refer to intelligence and previous instances. Now, they talk about violent clashes and hate crime offences when Maccabi Tel Aviv played in Amsterdam at Ajax in November 2024. Now, that led to various locals being convicted of assaults in attacks deemed anti-Semitic on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. There were also some anti-Arab chants from the Israeli fans too, but this is certainly becoming a growing row just weeks after attempts to ban Israeli clubs from European football did collapse amid the peace talks over Gaza, and also after Sky News revealed that the Trump administration said it would intervene if there was an attempt to ban Israeli teams from international football.
OK, Rob, for us then in the newsroom, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, the police will say we've made a decision based on, I think the intelligence and previous incidents, but also I think what Rob was reflecting there is this essence that, this country can't look after Israeli football fans.
This is shameful. I don't care what West Midlands police are saying and their justification. They have effectively handed over control to potential lawbreakers. They have conceded, we cannot control this, so rather than allow protest of some sort, and why allow the fans to come here, they can control this game. It is a dark, dark day. People would love to say we can keep politics and sport apart. You can't. They're too intertwined. That is the reality. I think this is a terrible, terrible day and a shameful decision by West Midlands Police.
I mean, this is the price that so many are paying for the actions of Israel in Gaza, that, there's a genocide unfolding in front of our eyes, and on all sides of this, we must tackle anti-Semitism. We must make sure that Jewish people are safe, but we also must make sure that people have the right to protest and that they are heard.
But
and that is a very different...
that the police feel that this would simply not be a protest. That's the bad bit of this, isn't it?
Yes, there's no doubt about that. And it's a tragic situation when countries can't play against each other in peace. But there is not peace, there is a genocide. And so we have to look at that and take cognizance of the safety concerns that there will inevitably be.
There's genocide on both sides, isn't there? Let's be honest about it. There's a genocide on both sides. As you know, Hamas have committed some appalling crimes as well. It's not one-sided, this debate.
No, it's definitely not one-sided, but I think...
who want to come and watch a football game
that is not an appropriate way to characterise it.
Cannot do it, and one of the major police forces in this country accepts we cannot control potential lawlessness is a shameful day.
OK, well, we will be talking about this throughout the evening here on Sky News. I'm sure it'll also be on the radio tomorrow morning well. And there will be further reaction. We'll bring it to you, of course, here on Sky News, as well as that debate about the situation in the Middle East. But let's turn back to here in the UK now and to the economy, because the Chancellor has told Sky News that apparently the UK is the envy of the world. She did say that when it comes to trade deals and investments. That's despite the decision by one of the world's largest companies, which deals with rare earth deposits, to ditch plans to build a new plant in Hull. Rachel Reeves has been speaking to our economics editor, Ed Conway, saying that you can't win every investment.
Chancellor, thank you for talking to us here. I think I remember it was 3 years ago in Washington that you did this big speech on securonomics, didn't you? And part of the point of that was where something is made and who makes it kind of matters in a way that maybe we didn't kind of appreciate before. I just wonder, obviously, you've probably seen the news that a rare earths refiner, Pensana, they're not going to be refining rare earths in the UK. They're going to be moving that to the US instead. It feels like quite a blow, given all the things I know that you take very seriously.
Well, those are commercial decisions, but there's also other decisions of investment coming to the UK. If you look at what's happening in Cornwall, for example, with lithium mines opening, investment from both the public and the private sector, the National Wealth Fund that I created in response to this understanding that where things are made, who makes them matters. And one of the things that we're discussing this week as the G7 is how we can improve the resilience and security of our nations that share each other's values, so we are less reliant on imports from abroad, especially when you see the restrictions that China are now placing on some of their exports.
But on that basis, it feels like this is exactly the kind of activity that you would have liked to have happened in the UK. So surely are you not at all disappointed?
Well, there are other examples of investment coming to the UK.
No, but specifically stuff that this decision is.
You can't win every investment decision, but there's plenty of investment coming to the UK, whether that is in critical minerals or indeed when it comes to things like AI and technology, or indeed on energy investment, where similar to critical minerals, we need to wean ourselves off Russian oil and gas. We have done that in Britain. You saw the announcements yesterday at cracking down further on oil refineries that are still refining Russian oil in India and in China as well, because who makes things and where they're made really matter. We have got to, as countries that share each other's values, ensure that we are more self-reliant than we have been in the past.
But isn't that the point? A company that wanted to make us more self-reliant for rare earths says that it's not going to be building a plant in the UK, it's going to build it in the US instead. And it's saying that's partly because there's just more incentive to do it in the US. I mean, this is totally relevant to securonomics, isn't it?
But the investment is within the G7, and there are other examples.
So you're relaxed about it if it's not the UK, it could be in the US instead?
I want investment to come to Britain, of course I do. I want those jobs.
In this case, you've said it's not the UK, it's the US.
But there are other examples of investment coming to the UK. If you look at the Trump state visit to the UK just a few weeks ago, we announced £150 billion worth of US investment coming into the UK. That's good for those US businesses to be able to diversify and choose a second home for their business activity. But of course, there are British businesses as well in life sciences, in technology, investing in the US, and that is welcome. So there are investments that are coming to the UK as well as investments going to the US.
But within the G7, you know, we're facing tariffs from the US. We're facing potential, take steel, tariffs from the US, tariffs potentially from Canada, tariffs from the EU as well. We're being tariffed by everyone else, and actually we're not lifting up our trade barriers in response.
I think if you look at what Britain has done in terms of trade this last year, we are the envy of the world, and certainly here amongst other
Even though we're
finance
paying much
ministers.
higher tariffs than before.
If you look at what we've managed to achieve in the last year with a trade deal with the US, the first country to achieve a trade deal with the US, the lowest tariffs of any country of the world with the US, a trade deal with the EU, undoing some of the most damaging impacts of Brexit, but also the most comprehensive trade deal with India, the fastest growing economy in the G20. Those are things that other countries haven't secured, and it puts us in an advantageous position. If you take steel, for example, tariffs on UK steel going into the US are half the tariffs of anywhere else in the world.
Which is what you said they would be.
And we're still negotiating on that, as we are negotiating. Well, we're still negotiating on that, and negotiating in other areas as well, like pharmaceuticals. But if you look at other countries in the world that are facing 50% tariffs on steel exports going to the US, you can see that we are in a more competitive position than any other country in the world. And that reflects the negotiating and the relationship that our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has built with the US, including with President Trump. And it's in our national interest to get those trade deals, because we are an open trading nation, open to countries around the world. And it's because of that trade deal that we secured with the US that we've seen that investment flow into the UK from the biggest economy in the world. But also when Keir Starmer went with a trade delegation of more than 100 business leaders to India just a couple of weeks ago, that's securing investment opportunities, but also export opportunities for great businesses in the UK.
Just on inflation, because I know that you've been focused on that. It is very high in the UK. You've got a budget coming up. I mean, do you think, is it fair to say that at least some of the things that happened in the last budget contributed to higher inflation right now?
Well, inflation is a global phenomenon, and other countries as well.
We're higher than anywhere else in the G7.
Well, we've got the second fastest growing economy in the G7. We do currently have the highest inflation in the G7, but it is a long way off the inflation that we saw under the previous government, where it went above 11%. But do we need to do more to bring down inflation? Absolutely we do, and we're working closely with the Bank of England to make sure that that inflation comes down back to target at 2%, and where it is forecast to get over the next year or so.
Well, a little earlier, I caught up with Ed after that interview with the Chancellor. Here's what he had to say. Ed, what was interesting there, listening to the Chancellor, is this sense that she talked about this lack of investment almost as if it was just another lack of investment, when this is slightly more important.
Yeah, I think it is important, Darren. I mean, you know, if you think about what she's kind of, just, you know, how she's cast her chancellorship, and there's this idea that she talked about, actually here in Washington 3 years ago, securonomics. And the point was basically, you know, a long time ago we didn't really care where something was made, but these days we should care where it's made. And the whole point of this plant was we were going to be taking something that at the moment is made almost entirely in China, and we were going to be making it in the UK, these critical rare earth materials that you know, basically China has a massive monopoly on. And it was at the centre, you know, this wasn't just any plant. It was the place where Kwasi Kwarteng launched the critical mineral strategy when he was business secretary a few years ago. Clearly a different government, but still right at the centre of things. So the fact that they are not building this plant in the UK and they shifted it to America ought to be the kind of thing you might expect her to be disappointed. But actually, you know, as you'll have seen from the interview, she kind of almost seemed quite sanguine about it, I thought.
Yeah, and what is also extraordinary, I thought, in that interview, Ed, is that, you know, she was given the impression, I think she used these words, we're the envy of the world. I'm not entirely sure anyone outside of Rachel Reeves thinks that, do they?
No, I mean, actually, my eyebrows were raised when I heard that line, because, yeah, I mean, like, the trade deals that we have are slightly better than other countries, definitely. There's no denying that. But we still face higher tariffs vis-a-vis the US than we did before. We're still facing potentially tariffs on our exports of steel to the Eurozone and indeed to Canada. So I don't think anyone is looking at any other country and saying it's the envy of the world. And so I do wonder whether in time people will look back at that. They'll see Rachel Reeves here at the IMF in Washington saying Britain is the envy of the world, given all of the kind of profound problems we have you know, not to mention with inflation, with what's going on with the public finances, with the bond yield, and then there's this kind of fact of certain plants relocating out of the UK and other plants shutting down. I don't think anyone is envious of all of that stuff, which outweighs, I think, a lot of the stuff she was talking about.
And just finally, Ed, and I mean this in a good way, you've been around for a while now and you've interviewed many chancellors over the years.
Well, thanks, Darren.
I'm always generous, I'm always kind. And what do you think where Rachel Reeves is? Because, you know what, she's facing a really tough task in this budget in, what, just over a month's time. What's your sense, having met with her today, where she's at?
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time with her so far here in Washington, and, you know, it's interesting. You know, obviously you tend to learn more from people when, you know, when the camera's not switched on. And I do get the impression from talking to her, there's quite a lot, you know, right now, she is facing a big challenge, and I think she's personally frustrated about it. And at the heart of that challenge is obviously she has this budget coming up. She's done the spending review. She said she did the big tax rises that she wanted to do, and then along comes this budget. And at the heart of this budget is the Office of Budget Responsibility coming in with the latest forecast for the UK economy, and they're going to do this massive reassessment of how well productivity, or badly productivity more accurately, is doing at the moment. And that could ride a coach and horses through all of her fiscal plans. And I think she is, you know, privately really frustrated that that's happened, but then she doesn't want to kind of slag off the OBR in public because, of course, this is the OBR, and, you know, the last people to disregard what the OBR were saying, that was Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So, you know, I think she is struggling right now with the sums. She's seen the numbers, they don't look that great. She knows that she needs to roll the pitch, and she was doing that recently with that interview with Sam Coates earlier this week. So she clearly knows that people need to be prepared for what are going to be some quite tough decisions here. But they're still working on it. You know, right now they go back to London pretty soon and they start to work on the next numbers, and it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster as those new figures come in from the OBR in the coming weeks, and we'll bring all of that roller coaster journey to you.
Oh, we will indeed. Ed, always a pleasure, live or join us from Washington. Thank you. OK, you're watching the Politics Up here on Sky News. Up next, the worst of all time, as President Trump rails against Time magazine for this front cover picture. We'll be looking at some other unfortunate political photos. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, we witness firsthand the gangs brazenly using drones to drop drugs into UK prisons. Also on the show tonight, the head of MI5 warns of a daily threat to the UK from other state actors. And we'll have the latest as Israeli football fans are banned from attending a Europa League match against Aston Villa over safety concerns. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
Sky News has been given exclusive data showing every Palestinian who has been killed in Gaza since the war began. Our analysis of this pattern in the killings suggests that entire families were wiped out in their homes or shelters. The data and forensics team is a multi-skilled unit dedicated to providing transparent journalism from Sky News. We located footage of the aid drop to a tent camp in central Gaza.
These airdrops are falling in extremely populated areas.
We combine traditional reporting with advanced analysis of satellite imagery, social media, and other open source information. Now, this is just one of the strikes and incidents we've been able to geolocate across Gaza. Sky News has found Nazi speeches and marching music have been used as background sound on tens of thousands of TikTok videos as far-right groups try and spread their message. Sky News has seen 72,000 posts used in this way. There's no evidence yet of foul play at Heathrow. It shows weaknesses that enemies could take advantage of. Elon Musk says it is, quote, a viper's nest of radical left Marxists who hate America. Supporters say it saves lives and projects American power and influence.
I think we would generally be called far right, sure.
It's called Return to the Land, and they invited me in.
A lot of people are going to be, why are you making Nazi references? Right. Well, why wouldn't I?
Its founder says he is building a fortress for the white race.
It's a racial association. I kind of want to ask you, after seeing this, do you think what we're doing is immoral?
We followed a social media trail that led us to Bristol, where a confrontation between protesters erupted into a full-scale riot.
Here it really is pitched battle skirmishes, hurling missiles, throwing punches.
I'm Tom Cheshire, Sky's data and forensics correspondent.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live. I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, if there's one thing about Donald Trump, is that he's going to say exactly what he thinks. And unsurprisingly, he's had a say on this. Now, the strange thing about this is it's actually a good media story about Donald Trump. He's had a pretty good week, and Time magazine wanted to reflect that. I think he's pretty unhappy about the picture. And let's be honest about it, I can see why, because clearly it looks like he's got no hair. I'm not going to say anything about that, but it's because the sun's coming through. He is not very happy at all. He's got the worst of all time. Well, as I said at the top of the programme, we've got two photogenic guests on tonight.
Oh, there you go.
Do you think he's right to be angry, Hannah?
I think this is just him trying to control the narrative. I mean, that is, there's obviously funny memes to come out of it, and there's comments to be made about what his neck looks like. That is just what he looks like, unfortunately, for him. But I think it's a bit more sinister in that he is, even though it's a good news story for him, he's determined to control the imagery. He's determined to control how he's presented.
Fair, all politicians are. And we want to talk about other politicians and them being caught with pictures. Obviously, the obvious one would be Ed Miliband eating a bacon sandwich, but it costs quite a lot of money, so we're not doing that. But we're going to take you through some others. Here is Sir Keir Starmer with an ice cream. And Nick, it's one of these things that when you photograph so often, you're going to look a bit silly sometimes.
Why do they do it? Why do they think they have to have a photograph taken of eating an ice cream there? I do think it's appropriate. There is that chocolate, so at least it can capture a bit of a flake. So we can say that with that particular choice of chocolate. So that does allow that.
For political balance, we've got Ed Davey with a rather big pumpkin.
They love us.
I actually think that's not a bad one at all. But what about Jeremy Corbyn and his marrow talking about vegetables?
Everyone looks horrified in that photograph. Nobody quite knows what to do or what to say. There are many funny captions that come to mind.
Boris Johnson in his tennis shorts. I think, do we need to see that at this time of the evening?
Oh, do without that.
With the tongue out, there we go. Hannah, Nick, we have run out of time.
Oh,
on
thank
that
goodness.
image. What a way to end the week.
Indeed.
Thank you very much indeed for your time on the Politics Hub. That is it, indeed, for tonight. And as I said, for this week, we've got the highlights programme this weekend on Sky News. Do join us for that. And I'll be back on Monday at 7 p.m. Have a good evening and a good weekend. Goodbye.